Something which is important for the countries with a long coastline and extended marine space is that for several reasons, work burden, cost, etc., we cannot start and do everything at the same time, which means that we need to put priorities. And putting priorities in assessing the vulnerability would mean that we should go through a rapid assessment. There are checklists, there are matrices, and we are thinking about how to develop such a tool which would be of interest for several countries in the Mediterranean. But if we want to do this vulnerability assessment properly, there are some indicators, there are some elements we have to take into consideration, and these are the following: habitat loss, erosion, environmental quality of waters, loss of fishing stocks, non-compatibility of uses. And there again, we don't start from scratch because there is experience of, for the different elements within the EU. EU is one of the contracting parties of the Mediterranean Action Plan and the Barcelona Convention and the protocol, so we can profit from their experience. And then it is important to understand that if we have clarity and knowledge about the vulnerability of the areas, then our options and our decisions about appropriate planning and measures will be facilitated for sure. Next issue, compatibility tables. There are already lots of different tables showing the compatibility of marine uses among themselves, by two usually. The easy stuff is to see which are the compatible uses and which are not compatible. But there are also gray areas. There are some uses which might become compatible on the basis of some conditions. So identifying these conditions for each one of the cases would be very important as well. Cumulative impact analysis and assessment in the Mediterranean. What you see here is a model developed which was used also by Pegaso, the Pegaso project, which was an international, multinational project financed by the EU. You see here that some colors are more dense in some areas, and in other areas we have yellow. This project was based on specific data for some areas where you have the differences of the colors, and the rest was a kind of projection. If we want to use this model really, it is complex, it is not for everybody, it requires expertise, it costs. But as it is now for the Mediterranean, it is a useful indicative tool. If we need to go in depth and see the specifics, then we need to have specific local data. So the importance of data starts to show up for every step. Assessment of the impacts of the different extreme phenomena. Climate change and sea level rise were two characteristic phenomena. There again, you can see a map which was used in the context of the Pegaso project. We can see, for instance, which differences are expected on the land, which differences are expected and impacts on the sea. Here again, it is more or less indicative. If we want something more specific, we need, again, very specific local data. What is important to keep from this is that from the moment we are expecting this kind of phenomena, which cannot be influenced that much by countries with a small contribution to the problem, what is important for each one of our Mediterranean countries is to start on time thinking and planning the adaptation programs and plans. What we did specifically in our project was a kind of scenario, assessing scenarios rather, of sea level rise in a concrete bay, concrete gulf in Sami of Cephalonia Island. And what do we have here? Upper on the left, the current situation. Upper on the right, the impact of a sea level rise by 50 centimeters. if the water comes up by 50 centimeters. Lower left if the water comes up by 1 meter. And lower on the right if the water comes up 1.5 meters. You see that a big part of the built-in area already will be covered by water. Do we expect that much of sea level rise? Not during our lifetime, but maybe for the next generation, unless if we have tsunamis or another extreme phenomenon again. But the conclusion one might draw from this kind of scenarios is that we need to decide and to implement setback zones. The setback zones are already foreseen by the protocol itself. And it was not just by chance. It was not because somebody woke up and thought this funny idea. It was for protection reasons. And one opportunity we have to understand the problem is here with the sea level rise, and we will come to another reason afterwards in a while. So the next methodological tool was the 3D mapping. 3D mapping, why? 3D mapping because there are differences between planning of the land part and planning of the marine part. If you plan on the land part, in fact, all activities are on the same surface. If you plan the marine part, you can have different activities on the bottom, different on the surface, and different at the different levels of the sea column. We need some technological tools in order to reflect this and make it visible. Make it visible not only for the planners, but also for the decision makers who are not technicians normally, usually. Also visible to the stakeholders who are not technicians either. So people have to understand what's happening and if some of these activities can coexist or not. We made some mapping for our islands to see which is the situation. Now, something important here is that high-tech costs. So we tried to use not costly tools, technical tools, which means open tools, which are free for this kind of mapping, because it's not only a question of using these tools in European countries, we have also to think about the third countries in the Mediterranean and the costs involved. So we use some open tools. We try to put all these uses on them. In fact, these technical tools, the open ones, have limited possibilities, I must say. This is what we found out from our project. So these tools give the relief, sea bottom, for instance, the seabed. You can put there the cables, pipelines, navigation routes, protected areas, etc. But again, what you see, it's only a relief plus the same kind of information as for the usual mapping. We don't see that much what we wanted to have as a column on the left. So it is only to make people aware that the open tools for the moment have limited use. But we need desperately to have some good maps of this kind. So we have to take this into consideration. The next issue, which is not exactly a tool, but we need tools for this, is how to integrate ECAP in the MSP. We are talking very often about the good environmental status, GES. It is important. We are talking about descriptors and indicators. We have commitments about this. What we have not talked sufficiently about is how, through planning, we may reach this. On the one hand, we see the good environmental status we need, and we forget that in order to get it, we need to use some tools. Planning tools can allow us to reach the objectives if we connect the marine uses with the descriptors and the indicators. So identifying the proper planning criteria and the regulated zones would help us very much. On the other hand, we cannot have protected areas in the marine space without marine spatial planning. We can have partly protection of the area itself, but if we do not think about corridors and buffer zones and about how to regulate the marine uses around the protected area, we will not have proper protection, really, in the long run. So, avoiding incompatibility with the protected areas, starting by SPAMIs, Natura 2000, which are areas with commitments of the countries, but also taking into consideration other areas of vulnerability, like, for instance, the EPSAs. EPSAs are the ecologically and biologically significant areas. They are not regulated. Countries have not accepted legal commitments for them, but they give a very good indication of the vulnerability, the ecosystem's vulnerability of the area, the marine area. So taking this into consideration, even on an indicative basis, is important. And the third element is that we need to use ecological criteria for definition of geographical planning and management areas. So if we do these three actions or categories of actions, we can contribute to ensuring GS, etc., and integrating ECAP finally in the process. Let us come now to the interactions between sea and land. There are three kinds of interactions. Interactions due to nature. We cannot change nature, we have to respect nature. So coastal erosion, sand removal by waves, etc., are normal processes, natural processes. The coastal zone is a dynamic zone. It is important to understand this, and this is one additional reason for having the setback zones as well on the coasts, because there is a movement. If we do not respect this natural movement, and if we build very close to the sand, to the coastline, then there is a risk of losing property. There is a risk of seeing the infrastructure being destroyed. So one thing is nature. The second is the interactions related to human activities. For instance, navigation. Navigation is a marine activity, but it needs ports on the land. Aquaculture, it's a marine activity, but it needs land facilities. Otherwise, they cannot circulate their products. Tourism, usually we speak about tourism on the land, but tourism needs very much swimming areas, also cruises, the new element in tourism. So there are several examples which make us understand that there are interactions of this kind even for the human activities. And then we have the third kind of interactions related to plans, measures, and policies. Usually in our area, we start by coastal zone planning, which means practically in experience on the land part. The moment we will start planning the marine area, which goes beyond this land part for which we had planning, the next plan, the marine plan, needs to be articulated, needs to be connected with the land plan. So for this, we need also to be aware and to do the necessary activities and actions, to take actions and to ensure synergies and integration. Therefore, we have to identify the major links and actions needed for each one of these cases and provide coherence at all levels and complementarity. I must say that this element of interactions has been mentioned in both legal documents, the protocol, and also the EU directive. So it is a must. We cannot just neglect it. On the basis of these lessons drawn, etc., we made some recommendations. For instance, we start by the competent authority and the process, the participatory process. For the EU countries, there was even a deadline. The deadline was the 16th of September of 2016. Most of the countries have proceeded so, the others are in the process. So anyway, for the EU countries, there will be some kind of clarity as regards the competent authority, coordination schemes, involvement of stakeholders, etc. the other Mediterranean countries would need also to proceed to this direction. Otherwise, they will have a problem in implementation. And building trust and networks are critical elements as well to this direction. Then, identifying the vulnerable marine areas is also something important. Through the full process or through a rapid assessment, it is up to the countries to decide. I will not continue long on this. We have already mentioned some issues. I come to the issue of data. There are two aspects in the issue of data, and data are really a critical point for MSP. One thing is, do we have all the necessary data? In the EU countries, we have pretty much of data needed. Not all, but a lot. And the strange thing is that we are not even aware of this, because often these data are scattered. So if we know that there are missing data, we should start in a very organized way to collect this. For instance, we have bathymetric maps only for selected areas where there were some important activities so far. But if we are going to plan in some other areas, we will need this kind of information as well. So the earlier we start, the better. But the most important thing is how to coordinate all relevant data banks in order to facilitate access to the data. We need access to the data in order to avoid paying again for the production of data existing already. We need some good networking of databases in order to exchange good practices and experience. And it is important, we think, it is important for the Mediterranean countries to ensure the existence of such a tool, because this will be of great assistance to everybody. There are already some related instruments in the EU, instruments which are focusing to the Mediterranean area as well. So profiting from these instruments would be really important. Integrating ECAP in the MSP, I spoke enough. I think I don't need to speak again unless if you have some questions. And we come to a recommendation which is related to the camps. We think that the next generation of camps would need to cover both parts, the land part and the marine part, because doing the work for both at the same time would give us experience for the future. And through these projects, we could cover policies of other nature, for instance, sea level rise, climate change, ECAP, etc., altogether on the same geographical areas, which means in an integrated way. And then, since the issue of mapping is so important, we made also a proposal to seek funding, which is not obvious where this funding would come from, but to seek funding in order to ensure the preparation of a GIS tool, an electronic mapping, where we would put all data, related data for the entire Mediterranean, so that we could access in an easy way. And this data should be, this map should be interactive, because if we have this possibility, which is a technical possibility, if we have this possibility, then we can play with scenarios and see easily if we locate a marine use here or there, which would be the impacts. This would facilitate consultations, and this would facilitate very much the decision makers. So these were our recommendations, main recommendations. It is up to the Mediterranean Action Plan system on the one hand, and to each one of the individual contracting parties to make their own decisions and to make their own choices. With this, I thank you very, very much on behalf of the team, and I am at your disposal if you are interested to discuss some elements with questions here or even afterwards during the interval.